the new news is, the Big 12 and the ACC, they're floating this 5-11 proposal. So it's not 7-11, it's 5-11. Five automatic berths, 11 at-larges, and that's a lot fewer automatic bids than the SEC and Big Ten want. So there's a Grand Canyon size difference. But, we all know the Big 12 and the ACC, they're not holding the cards. They're not the shot callers. They are not driving this bus. But is the conventional wisdom is kind of like the obvious answer, the right answer in that, in terms of USC and Notre Dame, what's good for college football in terms of the playoff is not necessarily good for the USC Notre Dame series and vice versa, because what we would agree is good for college football is, no, the Big Ten and SEC shouldn't be getting 4 automatic bids. Like a 4th place team in a conference automatically gets a seat at the table, bad for college football. But if the Big Ten is getting 4 automatic bids, that gives USC every reason in the world to continue the Notre Dame series, right? Because the downside, the cost of losing to Notre Dame just shrinks dramatically if you can get that 4th automatic bid from the Big Ten. Is the obvious answer the correct answer in terms of different playoff systems and how they would affect the USC Notre Dame series?
I think the most interesting comment on this whole situation was hearing Greg Sankey say that the 4-4 method might not actually be the best for the SEC, which kind of really surprised me. But his point was that, in years where there are more than 4 SEC teams that deserve to make the playoff, it's a disadvantage to them because they probably won't be one of the at-large bids or something like that. I don't know. It was... it's a little bit generous for the SEC because the SEC is a great conference, but I feel like pretty consistently they've been relatively top heavy, and they a lot of SECers have this opinion that basically every team in their conference is better than every team in any other conference, and like a 7-5 team in the SEC is better than a 9-3 team in the Big 12, in the Big Ten, or and like an 11-1 team in the Big 12 or something like that. It's a little silly. They just believe the quality of football is somehow better. Like, it's the same game, and these are a lot of historic programs outside of the SEC. College football is bigger than the SEC, obviously, but it was kind of interesting to hear. I guess I think that could benefit the SEC in some years, but also in other years, like last year, I don't know if you're seeing 5, 6, 7 SEC teams in the playoff. So it's just that comment was an interesting one for sure. But I think back to your question on the whole USC Notre Dame situation, I think that the 4-4, 4 for the SEC, 4 for the Big Ten, definitely puts USC back in the driver's seat in those negotiations, because they, again, can afford to lose more games and kind of scrape into the playoff as the 4th team rather than needing to be a top 2 team in the conference to have a secure shot of making it into the playoff, which is kind of last year and this year what you need to feel super sure. Sometimes there's going to be a 3rd or potentially even a 4th team making it in, but if you're going to feel secure at season's end about making it in, you need to make your conference championship game. So, and have had, a decent resume outside of that, not have just squeaked in because one team dominated and then the rest of the conference was bad. You have to have a decent resume and you have to make your conference championship game. But I just think, it puts them back in the driver's seat, because they're like, hey, we're welcoming this rivalry, but Notre Dame is conferenceless. And so suddenly a lot of these automatic bids are taken up by conferences. I think it puts it at 12 automatic bids to teams in conferences, because it'd be 4 for the SEC, 4 for the Big Ten, and then 2 each for the Big 12 and ACC. So that only leaves 4 at-large bids. One of them goes to another conference team that's outside of the Power 4, that's in one of the other, major conferences. So then that's only really 3 at-large bids. And now Notre Dame suddenly is a little bit more afraid of, we got to make ourselves stand out, because if we don't, we are going to, fall behind a lot of these other at-large teams, especially in some of the bigger conferences. So puts USC back in the driver's seat for sure. I don't know if that changes Notre Dame's strategy towards wanting to continue the rivalry and if suddenly they are going to want to back out more. I just think apart from this whole college football playoff issue, they really need to clarify what the qualifications are going to be for those at-large bids. It doesn't matter how many are going to be automatic and how many are going to be at-large. The committee just needs to be a bit more transparent about, is it going to be strength of schedule, or is it going to be record and or some other qualifier, like if you make certain games, or if you make the conference championship game or whatever. So I think it will be affected. I think the 4 Big Ten bids puts USC back in the driver's seat, but I also think that there needs to be clarification on the whole what makes an at-large bid, like what do programs want to pursue to get those bids, and that's going to be the more important issue going forward for this rivalry. And I think that that's what it's been the whole time. That's USC's main question, that's Notre Dame's main question, and once that's clarified, and if especially it is strength of schedule matters, then this rivalry is a lot more likely to continue, in my opinion.
All right, so another variable, at least something that's been mentioned, it's been floated, like we're not saying like this is going to happen or even that it's likely to happen, but just one concept that has been floated. And keep in mind, like we would all agree, the playoff is moving to 16. The playoff is going to expand from 12 to 16. It's just a matter of how the pie is being divided, right? In terms of the at-larges and automatic bids, which conferences get more slices of that pie. But we know that it's going to 16. Like that, on that point, we can feel safe. Like 14, it just doesn't seem as though that's a landing point right now, that it's going to be 16. So the idea that's been floated in conjunction with the move to a 16-team playoff, Ethan, is the double bye. So my presumption, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the presumption is 9 plays 16, et cetera, 12 plays 13. Those 4 winners then play 5 through 8 in essentially is the first round that we just had last season, that we will have this season, 5-12, 8 versus 9. And then we have, so the winners of those games, and then they play the top 4 seeds, which would get a double bye into the quarterfinals. One could make the argument that if there is a double bye system, as opposed to having, like the NCAA basketball tournament, 1 versus 16, 8 versus 9, just all the way through. One could make the argument that if there's a double bye system, meaning that Notre Dame could get a double bye as a top 4 seed, while USC is getting a number 14 or 15 seed, and USC therefore has to play 2 more playoff games to win the national title. Do you think that double bye versus 0 byes, or maybe a single bye format, do you think that would have a significant bearing and impact on USC's thought process relative to the Notre Dame series, or is that really very, very secondary and peripheral to all of this?
I think that's an interesting point. I think that's like a whole can of worms that I hadn't really thought about, because now that I think about it, like with the double bye, you're going to see a lot of complaining either way. I think if you're like a 1 seed and you happen to lose in that first quarterfinal game after having 2 weeks off, it's going to be, oh, we were rusty, they gave us too much time off, and now and the system is bad, and the other team had momentum because they won 2 games. And then vice versa, if you're the losing team and you're the lower seed and you were playing well, but you had a couple of injuries here and there, it's like, oh, like this system is bad, we had to play 2 games, they've been resting all of their players for 2 weeks, and we have injured players, and it's not fair, and blah blah blah. I think that in that sense, if you don't want people to complain about the rest factor, then doing a straight up 1 versus 16 makes more sense. But obviously that doesn't take in, that completely discounts a lot of the issues of the regular season mattering, and that also, if the 16 seed in a potential college football playoff is a lot closer in skill to the 1 seed in the college football playoff compared to the 16 seed in, a college basketball tournament in a field of 64 compared to the 1 seed, where you can pretty much almost always guarantee that it's going to be a win, and not a small one at that. So, you can't be like the 1 seed and be like, oh yeah, like we'll play the 16 seed just to stay fresh because we know we're going to beat them. Like, it's a lot different of an issue. The 16 seed team could very well beat you there. But yeah, in terms of whether the rivalry continues or not, the seeding being an issue, absolutely. I think that's something that both teams will have to take into consideration. Notre Dame's in kind of a unique spot because with the current system, they can't be a top 5 team because they're not in a conference, and so that's always an interesting thing for them because of, it's like what the top 5 conference champions or top 4 conference champions get, the double bye, and then the 5th conference champion automatically makes it in, and then beyond that, it's just kind of whatever. So it's just like kind of, they were annoyed with that last year, at least. I remember seeing a lot of Notre Dame fans who were like, oh, like, this current system is unfair because, Notre Dame could be the number 1 team in the country, but because they don't play a conference championship, they can't be a top 4 seed. But yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Like, block out a college football playoff bid for Notre Dame, like for the Notre Dame champion? Like, I think Notre Dame has a lot of advantages as an independent team. Obviously, everybody knows that, and so them having this one disadvantage shouldn't, be the biggest deal in the world. But anyways, yeah, it's definitely a factor for USC. I think that they're going to be watching that. I think that if it ends up being advantage Notre Dame, that's something that they don't want to give Notre Dame any more advantages either way. So yeah, it's something that they'll be paying attention to and will factor in.
All right, follow-up question on the concept of double byes. All right, if you have a double bye, and of course, last year and this year we have the 12-team system in which there are just 4 teams with 1 bye. But a double bye means that there really are 2 layers of games, as I just outlined. You have 9 through 16 playing each other in 4 games. That would be the new first round. The current first round is 5 through 12 play, but under a 16-team double bye format, 9 through 16 is the first round, and then those winners versus 5 through 8 is the second round, and then you get to the quarterfinals. So for those lower seeded teams, they'd have to win 5 games, not 4. This year, a lower seed has to win 4 games to win the national championship. But if there is a double bye system, Ethan, that's 5 games. This brings up a really interesting question. And I did mention on a recent show here at the Voice of College Football, the idea that, college football should be starting its season in early August to have more breaks through the regular season. Because if you're asking these teams to load up and play all these games at the end of the season to win the national title, and of course the conference championship game is part of this mix, and the SEC is thinking about these bubble play-in games, 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5, that would especially fit into a 4 automatic berth structure. If you're asking teams to play all these big games in December, you need to give them some rest. You just can't death march them through just a nonstop series of games. Like giving them 1 off week in October, that's not enough. You're going to actually need to give teams more weeks off when they play all that championship football, playoff football late in the year. So, Ethan, if you have a double bye, that's adding another weekend to the playoff. That's adding another ribbon of games to the playoff. My question for you is, does the idea of starting a season in early August still make sense in light of that? Or as the alternative, maybe college football should start its season in October. And because that way you can basically play through the month of February. Like you can basically come right up to the doorstep of the NCAA tournament February is a dead sports month. Not a whole lot going on. I mean, Olympic years are kind of their own, Winter Olympics once every 4 years. But most of the time, February is a dead year. It's kind of an NFL mentality of owning the calendar, like always having something going on at a different point on the calendar. Maybe the play is not you don't start in August, you end in February. To own the calendar. And the added benefit of this is players aren't having to play championship games around Christmas. They actually can perhaps get that time off, and then they basically start the playoff on New Year's Day. So like the Rose Bowl could have a first round game, and then maybe later in January a quarterfinal. So like the Rose Bowl could really benefit from this. They got their January 1, 2 o'clock, the way God intended, but then you can have a night quarterfinal game in mid-January, and then we have the championship game in mid to late February, and then it's March Madness, baby. So I've laid it all out. Early August beginning or late February finish if we have double byes and an even more expanded schedule for the college football playoff.
Man, you make a couple of really interesting pitches. I think I'm still thinking like a student because, like I mentioned last week, I just graduated. So I think the October-February model sounds a lot more enticing from a student's perspective, relative to the starting earlier model, just because you'll be on campus for more of it. I also just like thinking about being at home for Christmas break and having more college football to look forward to in the spring when I come back to campus. I mean, that's a pretty exciting idea to me. I think that's kind of always the big difference in college experience for me, or was the big difference in college experience for me, was going to, fall has football and spring doesn't. And football is just such a big part of the culture in fall. And then in spring, it just kind of disappears. So having football in both fall and spring, that's an exciting idea. Apart from just the spring game, which is kind of nominal and now doesn't even exist anymore. So, so that's exciting. I think that a lot of students would be excited about that. I think that also bears well for a lot of students who are on the quarter system because they start later. So they're actually going to be on campus for all their games, cough, cough, UCLA. But so that'd be fun. I think the obvious downside is you think about competing with the NFL. I think, the August idea is probably enticing for a lot of TV people because you get a whole month and plus a couple of weeks of football that's not competing with the NFL whatsoever. Like, it's just people being purely excited about college football from a TV perspective. And since a lot of these students aren't on campus yet, if you're a student and you attend USC, but you live in the East Coast and you're a big college football fan, you're not going to come out early for it. So you're going to be watching it on TV. So even more TV. So if you're a guy at Fox or a guy at CBS, you should be pushing for the August model. Honestly, I think those people would probably think that your idea was a brilliant one. Whereas, if you're competing with the NFL, it's just the excitement's a little bit more spread thin. But we've also talked a lot about whether or not, certain rivals should be afraid of one another in terms of talking about the USC Notre Dame rivalry. So maybe college football shouldn't be afraid to compete with the NFL. Maybe they should be confident enough in their product that they're willing to go up against them. But I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I think there's a lot of kind of rethinking and reorienting being done about how spring is going to look and how, a lot of it's up in the air anyway. Spring games are being canceled. People think that the offseason should look more like OTAs. Well, if it looks more like OTAs, maybe, and you want to make it more like the NFL, maybe put it on the NFL schedule, like you mentioned, and just end in February and then literally carbon copy what the NFL does with OTAs, which, OTAs are starting this week. Quick shout out to the NFL, but start with, OTAs, and then you do some more like organized mini camps, and then, you go into whatever, the whole NFL progression. But it's interesting. I think the only concern that I would have is when the when these college athletes are getting breaks, I think there's a less natural kind of school aligned like break system in terms of like, are coaches really going to let their players take 3 weeks off in the middle of the season with the playoffs coming up to not practice and go home, with their families and kind of be on their own conditioning plan? I'm not sure if they will, even if the NCAA technically allows it. I don't know if, unless they're forced to, if they're going to allow it. Like if you're a team like USC who needs to win their last 2 regular season games in January before they make it to the playoff, and you're in like a really kind of crucial spot, then are you going to sacrifice those 3 weeks to let players spend time with your families? I don't know if you will. And then, I guess you probably take a lot of the early spring off, but maybe you come back in the summer for what used to be spring ball, and then you're on campus again already. So just kind of where it seems like it would become more of a year-round thing, which maybe isn't a problem. I mean, they're getting paid to play now at this point, and
we're already moving in that direction, really.
Right. So maybe, maybe it's not the end of the world, but that'd be my main concern, is just still, letting these student athletes have some kind of reprieve and some mental reset. And where that would fall, I think, is a little bit less obvious in the February, October model. But it is exciting from like a student's perspective and being on campus, and I think it could work for college football if they're not afraid of competing with the NFL, and that, and I think that the NFL and college football shouldn't really be afraid of that, and they kind of actually would benefit from just having more people excited about football in general. So I don't think that it's a bad thing. I don't think there's too many people who are opposed to spending their whole weekend watching football in January and February, especially when it's so cold outside in most of the US.